Good afternoon, everyone. So we'll be starting in a few minutes as we wait for people to come in. Okay, so let's start. Pehan, can you put up the slide, please?
Yes, definitely. 1 second, please.
Awesome. Okay, so good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone, and welcome to this session on how to build synergies between the three Rio Conventions. I'm Stefania Perrin, I'm from Mauritius, and I'm currently a fellow at the UNFCCC Capacity Building Subdivision, and I'll be your moderator for this session. So the webinar series is part of a joint capacity building program by the Rio Convention. So now what is the joint capacity building program by the Rio Convention? So the joint capacity building program, it is initiated by the secretariat of the Rio Convention, that is the UNFCCC, the Convention on Biological Diversity, CBD, and the United Nations Conventions to Combat Desertification, that is UNCCD. The program aims to strengthen individual, institutional, and systemic capacities to enhance synergies between climate actions, biodiversity conservation, and sustainable land management, as well as to enhance coordination and coherence to achieve the three Rio Conventions objectives and the SDGs. You will have the opportunity to learn more about the program during this session. Now, regarding today's first session, it will be specifically focused on integrating planning of national strategies and policies under the Rio Conventions. And during the session, you will learn about best practices for creating integrated plans that address the intersections of climate action, biodiversity conservation, and land restoration. And the session will also highlight the importance of cross-sectoral collaboration and stakeholder engagement in achieving synergistic outcomes. Before we start, just a brief housekeeping rule. To avoid disruption and background noises, kindly ensure that your microphone is muted unless you're given the floor by the moderator to make an intervention. Recording of today's session, as well as presentations, will be uploaded on our event page. The link is now being posted in the chat format. We will also send out a survey at the end of the session for your feedback. And lastly, please note that by participating in this event, you consent to it being recorded. Now, agenda. So we will have opening remarks, which will be delivered by Mr. Alejandro Kilpatrick. Then we're going to move to a WooClap session. Then we're going to move to a presentation on leveraging Rio synergies, key findings from Rwanda, from a GIS representative. Then we'll be moving on a session on interlinkages between Rio Conventions and how to build synergies in planning processes, which will be delivered by Ludwig and Pehan. Now, regarding our speakers, so Mr. Alejandro Kilpatrick currently serves as the manager of a capacity building subdivision in the Means of Implementation Division. Prior to joining the UNFCCC in 2001, he worked 10 years for the global mechanism of the UNCCD in Rome as program coordinator for Latin America and Caribbean, focusing on facilitating access to funding from climate change financial mechanism for the areas most affected by land degradation and desertification. He also worked close to 4 years for the United Nations Environment Programme, Regional Office for Latin America and the Caribbean, on several environmental issues, including the Montreal Protocol, cleaner production, biodiversity, and land degradation. Our second speaker will be Waltraud Ade, who is a representative of the Economics of Land Degradation initiative hosted by GIZ. She led a study on synergies across the 3 Rio Conventions in Rwanda, which has remarkable outcomes that she'll be sharing with us today. She is also currently leading similar work in 5 Central Asian countries that will highlight pathways to build synergies between Rio Conventions. Then our next speaker will be Dr. Ludwig Liagre, who is a development cooperation professional, founder and managing director of Rio Impact, a consultancy firm specialized on policy and finance for biodiversity, land, and climate. He led complex projects in multiple geographies in partnership with a diversity of public and private organizations, and he is now supporting the implementation of a joint capacity building program initiated by the 3 Rio Convention secretariats. And lastly, but not the least, we have Pehan Yang, who is working with Ludwig at Rio Convention. He holds a master's degree of environmental policy with a focus on synergies between the 3 Rio Conventions. He used to do his internship at UNFCCC on this topic and is now in charge of developing knowledge products such as info briefs and training modules to support the Rio Convention Joint Capacity Building Program. And before we delve deeper in our discussion today, I now invite Alejandro Kilpatrick for his opening remarks. Alejandro, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Stefania, and good morning, good afternoon, good evening to our participants. Thank you for joining us in this first webinar of the series of webinars that will take place between today and the month of October as part of this joint capacity building program between the Rio Conventions. As we all know, this is a very important year for the Rio Conventions because the three conventions will be having the conference of the parties in the same year. That doesn't happen very often, so it's a very important year to maximize the importance of materializing synergies in the implementation of the Rio Conventions, particularly when the main instruments of the 3 conventions, like the NBSAPs, the NDCs, the National Determined Contributions, National Adaptation Plans, and the Land Degradation Neutrality Targets, are undergoing review processes in different forms and shapes. So the topic of this webinar is very important to see how taking advantage of this opportunity that these instruments are being reviewed, how they can be better integrated amongst themselves in the context of the Rio Conventions, but also with other policy frameworks like the SDGs, of course, but also national policy frameworks. So we have heard a lot about the importance of synergies, and I think everyone agrees of they're fundamental to achieve the conventions of the individual the objectives of the individual conventions, but also to contribute to the overall sustainable development objectives of countries. So this joint capacity building program that was mentioned by Stefania, the main objective is to materialize these synergies, to help build those capacities, skills sets, knowledge, to materialize them, not only about talking about the importance of them, but actually providing stakeholders, being parties, non-party stakeholders, with knowledge, skills, guidelines on how to practically materialize these synergies. And the integration of the Rio Conventions into planning processes maybe consider the first step. We're going to have also webinars that deal with accessing finance, with engagement of stakeholders. So trying to cover all these aspects in these webinars, and it's just the beginning. The program just started, and we will continue developing information products, e-learning products, and events like these webinars. So please stay tuned for what's going to happen today, but also for coming next. I'm very happy to be speaking, of course, on behalf of my colleagues from the other secretariats who are also joining us. Of course, if they want to contribute, you're more than welcome, but I have the privilege of delivering these opening remarks on behalf of our colleagues in the CBD and CCD. Thank you very much for the opportunity. I'm very much looking forward to what's going to be a very interactive session, and we'll hear very important practical lessons being learned, for example, from the economics of land degradation study carried out by GIZ, and very practical insights to be shared by Ludwig and Pejan. So without further ado, I'll hand back the floor to you, Stefania, and welcome to this event. And we look forward to an interactive discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Alejandro, for these remarks. So now I would like to invite you all to participate in a warm-up interaction session for WooClub, which will be moderated by Pejan. Pejan, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Stefania. So as you can see on the screen, that I'm sharing with you a QR code, and also the event code that you can enter on the wooclub.com. And on this website, you are able to share your comments on 2 questions that we proposed as a warm-up interaction. Basically, we would like you to share what comes to your mind when this topic, synergies between the Rio Conventions, what first comes to your mind. Please generously leave us your comments, and you can see your as well as other people's contributions on a word cloud, and we can have a very good look with your contributions and ideas. So now I see that some people has already sharing their contributions into the word cloud, but I'm going to hold this QR code for a while so that more people have time to scan it. But I'm already reading some very interesting words from you. I believe you can also see from your own phone or laptop. I see the most popular word we have now is collaboration, exactly what we are doing today. Resilience, nature-based solutions, and also ecosystems. Oh, wow, it's switching really fast. I think it's now a good time for me to switch the sharing screen to the WooClub so that everybody can also see it on this meeting room. So here. Yes. So now we can see that the biggest word is now collaboration and climate change. Well, please do bear in mind that we're not only talking about climate change today. Biodiversity conservation and land degradation neutrality are also very equally important topics that will be the focus of ours today. Thank you very much for your participation. In fact, we would like you to answer another round of questions on this. What knowledge and capacity gaps should be addressed to foster synergies according to you? What do you think that's hindering us from building more synergies between the 3 Rio Conventions based on your past experiences and practices? Interdependence, I see collaborative actions. Yes, interdependence, I really like this word. Instead of like holding the 3 Rio Conventions separated from each other, we should definitely build a stronger interlinkages, not just theoretically, but also in practical terms. Oh, it's jumping really fast again. Understanding of linkages, I'm very glad you mentioned that. Ludwig later will also address how the 3 Rio Conventions are interlinked with each other. How to access finance. Yes, another very important topic, also the topic for our second session of this webinar series. Sorry about this advertisement. Okay, I'm not going to read all these contributions, but again, thank you so much.
Abonnement.
Excuse me? Thank you very much again for your contributions. I'm going to keep this book club alive so that every time when you open this, you can still see other people's responses and contributions. So now I'm giving the floor back to Stefania, and who will assist us to move on this webinar session. Thank you again for your contributions.
Thanks a lot, Peihan. And now we move on to the next presentation. So we're going to have a representative of Economics of Land Degradation initiative hosted by GIZ, Waltraud Ade, for a presentation. Waltraud, the floor is yours. Just a few seconds because she's going to share her presentation.
Thank you, Stefania. I'm back. Can you see me again?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Sorry about this. Let me share my screen. So, can you see my screen?
Yes.
Perfect.
Yes, we can.
Thank you. Hello, everybody. A warm welcome from my side also. I'm delighted to be here and to present some of our work that we are doing together with our partners. And so let me jump into the topic. I want to talk about three things. The first thing is I want to tell you who we are, the Economics of Land Degradation Initiative. The second one is to show you why we have chosen the topic of Rio Synergies and what's the rationale behind it. And then I would like to dive deeply into our case study in Rwanda, so to give you some practical insights to a study process that we have done with partners together. So let me just start with the ELD initiative. So we are an initiative that was set up in 2011 by the German Federal Ministry for Economic Cooperation and Development, by the UNCCD, so the Convention to Combat Desertification, one of the three Rio Conventions, and the European Commission. And our secretariat is hosted by GIZ. And what we are doing is actually we work as an initiative on a science policy practice interface, and we are working to make values of land count in decision making, to show the true costs of land degradation and the real benefits of sustainable land management. And with our work, we aim to inform, promote, and scale land solutions for transformative change. And how we work is with our partner network and with scientists and practitioners in our ELD working group and beyond that. But we always work together with science to do study processes in countries with decision makers to inform decisions, to get a process, an integrated process in countries. And I'm starting with another partnership that we are doing with UNEP and Global Canopy, where we are looking at investment flows into nature-based solutions, to say, okay, how much money is invested into nature. And what we also are doing with this report series that comes out annually is to say, okay, how much money would we actually need to fulfill the global commitments under the three Rio Conventions? And there we can see a huge financing gap. And in the last report, we brought up the numbers to say, okay, the investments into nature-based solutions have to triple until 2030 and even quadruple until 2050. And of course, you can put more money into nature. You can also start on the other side of this circle here to say, okay, you have to decrease or repurpose harmful flows. And I think that there's a third option that we are also looking here to say, okay, we need more collaboration and integrated agendas. And I think that brings us right back to our topic here, where we are looking at the 3 Rio Conventions, the 3 bubbles on your left, and where we see that they really share common objectives. And in the middle, at the heart of those 3 conventions, it's land. It's conservation, it's sustainable use of land resources, and therefore that was actually our starting point for our work together with others to really say, okay, there's a potential for significant synergies from an integrated implementation agendas of land, biodiversity, and climate action. And that's what we were analyzing in a country case study in Rwanda. And maybe just to say, so we were not coming up with that idea completely alone. We were actually discussing with the Rio secretariats. We were kicking off the work in Rwanda in a joint workshop together. We were also presenting findings at the 3 Rio Conventions at different side events to also foster the thinking that it's not a siloed thing that we are doing, but rather we talk about integration across the agendas. And coming right to the core of our work, the Rwanda case study that was done in May 2022, we started, and a year later in June 2023, it was finished and then also disseminated, and we are still building on that work, I'll tell you later. So what was the aim and objective of doing a country case study? To see how could Rio synergies, the potential be lifted. So we were looking at the economic costs of the siloed programming and implementation at the country level. And then we were really comparing it with joint programming, and we're looking at social, environmental, and economic benefits that would bring when we think the 3 Rio agendas and their target systems, so land degradation, neutrality targets, LDN, NDCs, and NBSUBs for biodiversity and climate together. And with our work, we were focusing on land restoration targets only. And what we wanted to discover was the following research question. We're looking at the costs of land degradation in Rwanda, looking at the financing needs for restoring degraded land in Rwanda, and also looking where could be the highest benefits, so where the areas with the highest cost-benefit ratio, and also looking at policy implications. And actually, I wanted to mention that all of our studies are online. I share the link later on the slide. You can find everything on our website. Also, this Rwanda study process that we have done together with the University of Bonn, Rwandan partner ministry was the Ministry of Agriculture and the ELD initiative. We have a study report and a policy brief for you there. And now I start with the basics. So what do we understand by synergies? We say, okay, synergies would lead to like an economic way of thinking, to increased effectiveness. So with collaboration, we can restore more hectares of land than in a siloed way, and to increase efficiency. That says, okay, every hectare we can restore at lower costs. That's actually the system where we come from, this economic one. And economists always talk about trade-offs. So if you promote one thing, it can have negative impacts on something else. So for example, biodiversity and land, there could be impacts on food security. And we're also having that in mind when we are doing the study. Okay, so that's the background. This is what we understand by synergies. The next thing was we started to look at land-based targets under the 3 Rio Conventions. So on top you can see the LDN, MB-subs, NDCs, right? The targets for the conventions, and also the Bonn Challenge. And there we said, okay, what area are we talking about? And we could see if we would sum up everything here together, we see that the total area of commitments is 3.8 million hectares of land. And now I'm not sure, do I have anybody from Rwanda here? it's getting interactive, people. I think I have nobody from Rwanda or nobody who knows the area and wants to raise their hands. So actually, the total area of Rwanda is only 2.6 million hectares. So that tells us, of course, the pond challenge, as you can see, it kicks in a lot in terms of hectares. But it tells us if we would look at everything in a siloed approach, we exceed the country size of Rwanda. And so it makes sense to collaborate. So that's also another indicator for that. We also looked at overlaps in the different target systems in targets. But I think that's just to illustrate that these are overlaps that we could identify. And then I wanted to show you one slide because I think it's very interesting also for non-land people and non-economists to say, okay, we need $300 million to restore and sustainably manage land until 2030 in Rwanda. And then we say, okay, what are the costs? On the left-hand side, you see the costs for restoring degraded lands in a spatially explicit way. So in a map, right, where you can really see the location. And then on the right-hand side, you can see, okay, red, yellow, green, very easy system to understand, okay, where does that cost us more money to do it? And where does this has a higher return on investments if we restore land? And so I think that is something we can also do with this analysis and with looking at synergies to overlay data to see, to identify locations. So that was actually the meaning of that slide. The next one is also, because I saw climate change coming up a lot, one could also look at carbon sequestration potential. I don't want to cite up the numbers, but just showing you what would be possible to do. And then what I really want to dive a little bit deeper is the scenarios that we were building. So we were coming up with 5 scenarios where we said, okay, what could we evaluate and compare? So these would be scenarios for joint implementation, and these scenarios, so a joint interagency working group, information exchange platform, joint monitoring and evaluation systems, joint funding and mobilization for land, and joint research and capacity building. These were the scenarios that were identified, and these scenarios we were looking at. And this is actually the outcome. So in blue, the blue bar shows you the baseline. So what's happening at the moment? So not coordinated, more siloed approach. Of course, there's always a little bit of collaboration. I think that differs in countries, but basically what we have at the moment. And in orange, you see the scenarios that we were calculating with a coordinated joint programming approach. And there you can see the bar on the left is monitoring and evaluation. And there you see that there's the biggest gap is here. And then also in the other, you see that the yellow one brings efficiency and effectiveness regarding costs, so savings. And in total, we see that the implementation, so coordination, can help to save approximately 15% of implementation costs for the Rwanda case. And it can also reduce more than 50% of transaction costs. And when I say transaction costs, I mean reporting procedures, registrations, transfer of funding, monitoring, evaluation, all of that, right? So because of that, the number is higher than in real implementation. And what is also interesting, qualitatively, it can help to avoid trade-offs. And this, of course, is based on a modeling exercise. And that's already my last slide that I want to share. I don't want that you look at the bubbles in detail, but it's just to show you how many actors, different actors are there, from the government actors to farmers, to cooperatives, to NGOs, to donors, and they are all interacting in this sphere. And so cooperation is actually not only about the agendas and the implementers at the government level, but also others. So it's like different levels from national to local level. And here are the key findings of our process, where we say, okay, we see that the targets are partially overlapping and complementary. We could see with that implementing with coordination has lower effectiveness and efficiency. We need to harmonize this institutional setup. That would also help a lot. And the major findings and recommendations from our study to lift efficiency gains from coordinated actions, we identified five possibilities to think about. So, for example, having a joint interagency working group across ministries, across actors, data exchange, information exchange platform to really share data and make it accessible. Have joint coherent monitoring and evaluation systems. So, for example, not using soil organic matter and soil organic carbon as different indicators, but harmonizing that would also help. For example, that's a very small thing, but it has also very big implementations in this monitoring and evaluation systems one. Joint planning and funding mobilization, that's also an interesting one. And joint research could also bring a lot of efficiency gains. And I have a really last slide now, I'm sorry. That was the last slide for Rwanda. And we are actually now working on a process, as Stefania introduced, building on this lessons and work that we have done in Rwanda. We are working now together with CGIAR centers, the International Rice Research Institute and the ICARDA Triland Institute in Central Asia, and colleagues from GIZ, to look at a regional study on the synergies, building on the same methodology and particularly focusing on investment cases for integrated land, biodiversity and climate action. So looking how could we mobilize funding, and improving and building up monitoring and reporting systems to see, okay, where are hotspots, how could that be more integrated. And so that's a regional one in 5 countries, and we're doing an Uzbekistan deep dive where we go deeper and build on that work that was done in Rwanda. Study was kicked off last year at the subsidiary meetings under the UNCCD, and it will be launched in December this year at the COP of the UNCCD. So, and now that's it from my side. Thank you very much for your interest, and I hope to get some questions and interest from your side. Thank you very much. Stefania, back to you.
Thank you very much, Waltraud, for this very insightful presentation. And like you mentioned, I would like now to open the floor for a few questions. So please don't hesitate if you have any question for Waltraud. Okay, I see Verena Sommer. Yes, please.
Okay, wait, now my camera is on. Okay, thank you very much, Waltraud, for the insight. And probably it's clear as GIZ, I'm asking for the stakeholder management or construction something. It refers to the last slide. So I was wondering if you have an idea how the distribution of the different topics and also the negotiation lines within the ministries is influence the grade and willingness to cooperate. So here in the Rwanda case, it looked at with the environment ministry, at least also climate is included, but I'm not sure. And I'm just wondering, does it make a big effect, or does it have a big effect if more ministries are included or have to be coordinated, or at the end, as when it's separate, everybody or all of them have separate budget lines, if it even would make it easier? Thanks.
A very good question. Thank you, Verena. Yes, I think Payan and Ludwig, they have a number. So the focal points for the different Rio Conventions are often in different ministries. For example, in Environment Ministry, Agricultural Ministry, sometimes in the Foreign Office, I also learned. But for example, in Rwanda, it's in different ministries. So because of that, I think we also have some coordinating actors. But from my experience, I think countries are very different. And I could also feed that back if we have country representatives. But in Central Asia, for example, in Uzbekistan, the focal point is in the same ministry for all three conventions. And what I learned from our GSAT colleagues with whom we are working, that this is also a big task to handle for one single person to follow up on those three conventions. So that I think it's not only willingness. I think it's also having a lot on your table and a lot of different hats that needs to be coordinated. And if it's in the same ministry, it doesn't mean it's the same person, right? And so then you have maybe different levels in a ministry that have to talk to each other. And I think from what I've seen, but I really do only know Uzbekistan and Rwanda as a comparison now, and also the other Central Asian countries where we are still working on to understand better. I'm not sure if it's a big advantage as it brings other like challenges, but I think bringing people together on a table, it is really the key issue to understand where people can learn from others and use systems, so that we have seen, for example, in Central Asia, where we had all national focal points or representatives of the national focal points, because sometimes they're at minister level, so they would be more technical staff, I think, discussing on the topics, bringing different angles in. That was a very interesting exercise that we did. So I think there's no yes or no answer to that one.
Okay, but thanks also for the insight to Uzbekistan.
Thank you very much. I see that Juan Pablo has his hand up. Juan Pablo, the floor is yours.
Yes, thank you very much for the presentation. Very interesting topic. I would just ask one question, and it is how can we avoid double counting in financial terms when we are overlapping the different tree convention targets?
Cannot answer that one. How can we avoid? I'm not sure that maybe we have to feed that back to Alejandro. I'm not sure if we have to avoid it, because when you look at what synergies are, if you consider that the different under the different conventions, the pledges are made for, like the targets are set from the one perspective. It could, in my opinion, also bring a big advantage to say, okay, but how can we reach our targets jointly together? How can we identify? There's a lot that we have to fulfill. If you look at the commitments of Rwanda alone, do we really have to have everything on a separate location, or would it make a lot of sense to work together and collaborate? And it's then, for example, for monitoring, you go out one time to the field to get your indicators, you share it, you see your peer fellows in the other, working on the other topics, makes a lot of sense financially, I would say.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. I see no other hand. Okay. So thank you very much, Waltraud, for once again. Okay, one more hand, one last hand. Raquel, yes, you have a floor.
Yeah, sorry. I don't know what's going on with my computer, but maybe you can hear me.
Yes, perfectly.
Yes. Yes. Hi. I would like to know how do you integrate like science, like research from different perspectives, like for example, protected area information or other programs like KBAs, IPAs, that is the key important areas for birds or for mammals and plants in this plan of restoration. And in your like plan.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much for that question. Yes, so that was what we discussed, for example, at the Inception workshop in Central Asia, where we had people working on biodiversity. And so we came up in Central Asia with an overlap of protected areas. On the maps that I showed you, you can really see where the protected areas are, and then you can see like that where and identify like that land restoration. There's also the issue of what happens with climate change in future. So is that still holding true? So it's different. So it's getting more and more complex, I think. But I think it's also very good to bring the different perspectives in. Is that answering your question?
Yes, but you have like researchers from different institutions in meetings and in...
Sorry, decision makers. We had decision makers working on biodiversity, so from the Environment Ministry, and they were sharing the data where the protected areas are. Others were coming in with disaster. We had, for example, I forgot the snow leopard. It's a very big topic in Central Asia. And so people were saying, okay, this is where we get our biodiversity data from. And I think from a research perspective, we are looking at modeling with satellite data. And I think for conservationists, it's also very important to say, okay, but we have to go in the field and do data. So this is not in our study because we look from space, actually. So survival rates, what's a forest? There are different things that need to be discussed, but with decision makers and experts also that support ministries we were discussing.
Thank you very much. And again, thank you very much, Waltraud, for sharing your insightful work with us. Always a pleasure to have you with us. And we look forward to working with you further. So now we move on to the next part of our session, and we're going to look at the interlinkages between Rio Conventions and how to build synergies in planning processes. And this session will be delivered by Pehan and Ludwig. So the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Stefania. I hope you can hear me well and that you can also see my screen.
Yes.
Fantastic. Well, it's a pleasure to be with you today. And maybe to start, let's have a quick reminder on those three Rio Conventions. Because they were born at the Earth Summit in Rio de Janeiro in 1992. And now, let's say, they comprise three of the major international treaties on questions related to the environment and sustainable development. But there are many other multilateral environmental agreements. So we are looking now at the three sister Rio Conventions, namely the CBD, the Convention on Biological Diversity, that aims to preserve biological diversity, to promote sustainable use and related benefit sharing, fair benefit sharing of genetic resources. One of the big achievements of the CBD has been the Global Biodiversity Framework, the GBF, that was launched in Montreal at the last COP, the COP15. It has 23 targets that guide the global biodiversity efforts. Then we have the UNFCCC, the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, that seeks to stabilize the greenhouse gas concentrations to prevent climate change. And some of the key agreements attached to it, you all know them, the Kyoto Protocol, the Paris Agreement in particular. And we have, not the least, the United Nations Convention to Combat Desertification, the UNCCD, that addresses issues related to desertification, but also beyond desertification, land degradation more generally, and drought, particularly in dry regions, but not only in dry regions. All countries and regions in the world are concerned and are addressed by the convention. The UNCCD is custodian of the SDG target 15.3 on land degradation neutrality, LDN. So you start understanding that the world of Rio Conventions is also a world of acronyms. So please keep in mind that there are not a lot of acronyms to remember, but we'll get to that, and you'll see it's not that complicated. So why synergies are important? As Waltraud elaborated very well, there are a number of reasons why synergies are to be considered as an important topic. for the 3 Rio Conventions, but also beyond, looking for synergies with other multilateral environmental agreements would be very important. And then in the field of biodiversity alone, you've got several conventions, the CMS, the CITES, Ramsar, etc. So all of them, ideally would work well in synergy. Well, we talked about the importance of integrated planning for more efficiency. That means also reduced costs of planning, but also of monitoring and evaluation. That means also more resources that can be allocated for actual implementation on the ground. Co-benefits, of course, because by building synergies, you generate more benefits, co-benefits that contribute to achieve multiple goals at the same time. And stakeholder mobilization by putting together in the same rooms, in the same coordination fora, the different stakeholders of the 3 Rio Conventions really help also to galvanize and mobilize more contributions, more energy for the achievement of the 3 Rio Conventions objectives. So the topic is not new, and the 3 Rio Convention secretariats have considered the topic of synergies as very important for a long time. That's why in 2001 already the Joint Liaison Group, the GLG, was created. So the Joint Liaison Group is formally speaking a coordination committee between the 3 executive secretaries of the 3 Rio Convention secretariats. And so this group is meant to share knowledge, data, information on how to build better synergies. Among the key topics of this group, capacity building is very important. That's why actually this particular program, now this Rio Conventions Joint Capacity Building Program, is an output of the GLG. And a number of other key topics have been considered priorities along the years, including adaptation to climate change, for example. By the way, we are building now a knowledge product on how to integrate synergies in the context of NAPs, of National Adaptation Plans, but also we're going to do the same for NBSAPs, the National Biodiversity Strategy and Action Plans, and for SDN targets. We'll go back to this in a few minutes. Good thing to understand how those conventions work is that they have many similarities in their structures. You have for all of them what is called science policy interfaces. For example, for the UNFCCC, I'm sure you all heard about the IPCC, Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, but you also have a similar science policy interface under the CBD, the IPBES, Intergovernmental Science Policy Platform on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services. And for the UNCCD, it's called the SPI, the Science Policy Interface. There is also an emphasis on capacity building, knowledge sharing for all the 3 conventions. That's why you will find on all the 3 Rio Conventions websites, you will find a capacity building portal. And by the way, the content of that particular program, this Rio Conventions Joint Capacity Building Program, all the training material, all the knowledge products will be made available on those capacity building portals. You also have similarities in terms of subsidiary bodies that are geared towards implementation, technical advice. Like the idea of this is to create fora for country parties to be able to engage in technical negotiations, but also to share common language and opinions and ideas on key topics related to technology, to technical advice, etc. So it's a very important fora. These are very important fora with also regular meetings that are key also in the preparation of the COP negotiations. The call for synergies is not new. As I was mentioning, in 2009 already, the United Nations General Assembly noted the need for enhanced cooperation among the Rio Conventions. And then decisions on the importance of synergies were made multiple times at different COPs for UNCCD, UNFCCC, and CBD COPs along the years. You may have noticed in some of the COPs, you have what is called the Rio Conventions Pavilion, which is a very interesting fora, also a place for side events, usually special events that address topics related to the synergies. So moving on, just wanted to mention that more recently, we even had very clear statements on the importance of synergies. For example, in 2023, there was a joint statement of the presidents of the CBD COP15, the UNCCD COP15, and UNFCCC COP27 on the importance of building synergies between the Rio Conventions. And in 2024, this year, you may have also noticed the resolution of UNEA6, the UN Environmental Assembly resolution to promote synergies, cooperation, and collaboration for the national implementation of multilateral environmental agreements, including the 3 sister Rio Conventions. So in those efforts to build synergies, there is one category of stakeholders that is particularly important. These are what is called the NFPs, the national focal points of the 3 Rio Conventions. And as Waltraud explained very well, in some cases, those 3 Rio Conventions focal points sit in the same ministry, but sometimes they are in different ministries. So according to the situation, the question of collaboration, coordination could be more or less complex. And oftentimes it's also a question of personalities. You know, there are a number of ways that these NFPs can sit together, work together on joint initiatives. By doing that, by reinforcing the national focal points' abilities to build synergies, to coordinate with their counterparts for the other conventions, of course, you prepare the enabling environment for more solid synergies. And so, you know, having the NFPs in the same ministry or not is not necessarily a limiting factor. It's mostly a question of willingness, and I've witnessed countries where the 3 NFPs are in different ministries, and at the end of the day, coordination can take place very well. The question of synergies is not a question of having less people, and sometimes there is a bit of a contradiction, like people may tend to understand that we want to cut staff and jobs for those roles. Not at all. We need more strengths, more brains, more power, energy from different people in the implementation related to the goals of the 3 Rio Conventions. We need more efforts from the NFPs and their team. And so it's not a question of less people, but on the contrary, a question of ideally having more strengths, more people, but better coordinated. So as Waltraud also mentioned, you have witnessed the amount of resources, of additional resources that we need. That means we need also more people to be able to spend and engage those resources properly through different types of projects, public, but also private projects. And in the next webinar, actually, we're going to discuss the topic of how to finance the synergies and finance synergistic projects. And you'll see that the private sector has a very important role to play to finance synergies, to mobilize resources for synergistic projects. The good news, so to say, is we have many topics that are relevant to synergies. Some of them you know very well, like climate smart agriculture, ecosystem-based adaptation, forest and landscape restoration. You know, and synergies, it's not only about terrestrial ecosystems, you also can build synergies in coastal and marine ecosystems. It's very important also for that program for us to consider the topic of synergies with a broad perspective in terms of diversity of types of ecosystems. Now let's come to the very important question of the key entry points for synergies. How do we build pragmatically the synergies? Well, it can start with the national processes under the 3 Rio Conventions. You may know the nationally determined contributions, here that mitigation, but also national adaptation plans, also under the UNFCCC. And then under the CBD, country parties have to develop their national biodiversity strategies and action plans. And under the UNCCD, it's about defining land degradation neutrality targets at country level. And so those national planning processes are all very good opportunities to include the synergies and build the synergies among the 3 Rio Conventions. One window of opportunity, for example, in the context of NBSAPs, is now the need to align the NBSAPs with the Global Biodiversity Framework, which offers an interesting window of opportunity to integrate or better build synergies within those very important strategy and action plan documents. So we're building also, as part of this joint capacity building program, guidance and info brief document, knowledge products on how to include synergies, integrate synergies and build synergies within those different planning processes. And ideally also building a framework for those planning processes to be better integrated in the future. The good thing those last years has been the development of a number of support programs for those national planning processes. And all these initiatives that you can see here on the slide, including the NDC partnership, the NBSAP Accelerator partnership, the LDN target setting program, they are really interesting initiatives that could help also in the future be multipliers of the knowledge for synergies and help also the inclusion, the integration of synergies in those planning processes. So with that, I'd like to actually thank you for your attention, and I'm gonna give the floor now to my colleague Pehan, who will lead you into practical examples of how to build synergies in the context of specific countries. Thank you very much. Pehan, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Ludwig. I'm sharing my screen now. Can you see my screen and hear me clearly?
Yes.
Yes.
Excellent. So thank you again, Ludwig, for your excellent explanation on the context and linkages between the three Rio Conventions. I hope everybody is not yet confused by the acronyms of NDC, NAP, NBSAP, and LDN targets, because in the following part, we're going to play a bit with them. So what you can see on the screen that kind of looks like the Google Chrome is actually a framework proposed by WWF in their report, Breaking Silos, Enhancing Synergies Across NDCs and NBSAPs. But in fact, if you take a closer look at these areas for potential synergies, you'll notice that these 6 entry points are not only applied for NDCs and NBSAPs, they can be applied to all the national processes that we just mentioned. So in order to give you a clear idea how these elements, how we can identify synergies through integrated planning, I'm going to elaborate on each one of them while presenting one or more examples showing you how synergies can be achieved or have been achieved in past efforts. So first, we're going to talk about the guidance for developing, implementing, and monitoring national strategies. And yes, an overarching guidance can be really helpful for governmental officials and other stakeholders, especially when the NFPs of the Rio Conventions are separated in different ministries. So it may surprise you that 20 years ago, the government of Bhutan has already developed a reference guide for Rio Conventions, touching upon these key topics on the right that we're still talking about today. But of course, in 2004, at that time, we did not yet have NDCs, NAP, NBSAT, etc. But this is still a very good example that we can learn from the past, that nowadays, providing, developing, or updating such a reference guide can be the initial step to build synergies across the Rio Conventions, especially in developing countries like Bhutan. Moving on, the second entry point for synergies through the integrated planning is the coordination between different national policies. Here, I like to quote this example from Grenada, which was developing a project in 2019 about climate-smart agriculture. This project ambitiously aimed to incorporate all the objectives of the Rio Conventions and strategies into climate-smart agriculture, and therefore it necessitates institutional arrangements to coordinate different national policies. So the Grenada government established the MEA coordination meetings. MEA stands for Multilateral Environmental Agreements, which, for example, the Rio Conventions are MEAs themselves. And also they established the Ad Hoc Project Steering Committee. So these two institutions, these two mechanisms, both serve the aim to coordinate different national policies and their relevant institutions. But of course, establishing such mechanisms does not solve problem automatically. it's no secret that the members of these meetings and steering committees from Grenada government are still suffering from the lack of capacity. So we can conclude that not only we need to establish relevant mechanisms, but also the follow-up capacity building activities are equally important to ensure that coordination are actually happening. Moving on, the third entry points the WWF framework has identified is defining integrated targets and measures. This one, I believe, is the easiest to come to mind when you think about synergies. So here I'm proposing you two examples. One is to align the adaptation goals and the biodiversity goals. The other one is between biodiversity and land actions. So the first example, you can see that study has shown that the global goal on adaptation and the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework, the GBF, can share a strong linkages with each other. The seven action areas identified by the UAE framework for global climate resilience and the 23 targets identified by the GBF can have a lot of interlinkages that you may want to take into account when developing the NAP and also the NBSAP, because if you don't, well, you can for sure that you are going to repeating a lot of works and spending a lot more money. And another example is the linkages between the GBF and the LDN targets, which are identified by this report produced by the UNCCD. Again, I'm only showing you a part of the targets of the 23 targets from GBF, but as you can see that among the 3 targets, a lot of linkages can already be identified, and as the list goes on, more and more linkages can be found, and therefore the synergies can be forged. So we move on to the next entry points for integrated planning, that is the global processes for taking stock of climate, biodiversity, and land actions. I think the most obvious global process for taking stock that comes into your mind may be the first global stocktake of Paris Agreement that was just happening last year. But this is only focusing on climate action. In the future, of course, we hope that there will be more processes like this to take stock of biodiversity and land actions. And another example for this global processes that may not come to your mind immediately, but is also quite logical, is the collaboration between the science policy interface. For example, in 2020, the IPBES, if you still remember, is the science policy interface for CBD, and the IPCC, which is for the UNFCCC, they co-organized a workshop on biodiversity and climate change. And they produced the scientific outcomes summarizing the emerging state of knowledge involving climate change and biodiversity, and also identify the knowledge gaps to be solved, and also the trade-offs to be addressed. So following this, it is very logical that we expect more collaboration between IPBES, IPCC, and also the science policy interface under the UNCCD to collaborate on in this way. Now, the fifth entry point for integrated planning would be stakeholder engagement. And here I'd like to propose to you this specific example of Peru, because the Peruvian government paid special attention to engage with local and indigenous communities to enhance synergies. For example, under their climate mitigation actions, Peru established the National Forest Conservation Program for Climate Change Mitigation, which works directly with indigenous peoples and communities to monitor the forest ecosystems in their territories, and also to draw from their vision, knowledge, and the ancestral wisdom. And under their climate adaptation action, Peru established the Indigenous Peoples Platform for Climate Change, which is a key instrument for their national adaptation planning process. So here we're only talking about climate change actions, But in fact, engaging with indigenous peoples and understanding and also applying indigenous knowledge is vital for promoting synergies among the 3 Rio Conventions. And this will be the topic for the 3rd session of our webinar series. And last but not least, the last entry points for integrated planning would be joint monitoring and evaluation. Now, I'm not going to elaborate too much on this because my example is directly quoting the remarkable outcomes made by the ELD initiative and the GIZ, which Waltraud has already introduced to you just now. So I'm only showing you this particular table from Waltraud's slides, highlighting how much you can reduce the transaction costs if you with a joint monitoring and evaluation mechanism and without a joint M&E mechanisms. I believe that many governments, especially in developing countries, when it comes to their implementation, they'll think, okay, synergies are good, but the money, how are we going to spend them? But the moment they see how much transaction costs they can save, I believe that anybody will be just on board. Okay, let's do synergies. So before I give the floor to you, our dear audience, I believe you already have some questions to raise. Let me conclude my part with some recommendations for policymakers and practitioners based on the previous analysis of entry points for synergies. First, we strongly suggest to mainstream the synergies and make best use of the windows of opportunities. This, together with developing or updating and overarching guidance we mentioned before, can be a reciprocal process, and that can be a very important initialization of building synergies in many developing countries. And also, as we mentioned in the second example, in the case of Grenada, we realized that establishing a coordination mechanism is important, but it does not solve the problem once and for all. The follow-up capacity building for individuals, institutions, and also the entire system is vital to maintain this coordination. And third, it is highly suggested for all policymakers to proactively identify common targets and measures from different agenda, including the Rio Conventions and the Sustainable Development Goals. And fourth, we see that political processes and scientific research collaboration to take stock of actions and address trade-offs can lay the foundation for all our future works. So it is strongly suggests that we promote more of these actions in the future. Fifth, as we mentioned before, that understanding and applying indigenous knowledge and practices is vital to enhance synergies. And you're both welcome to keep following our webinar series if you are interested in this topic. And last but not least, as the studies from Waltraud has already told us, a joint monitoring, evaluation, and learning process can be a very cost-effective way for building synergies between the 3 Rio Conventions. So I'm going to stop here and give the floor back to Stefania to help us go through the Q&A session. Thank you very much for your time and for listening.
Thank you very much, Pehan and Ludwig. So now I open the floor. If you have any questions for Pehan and Ludwig, please don't hesitate. As always, please raise your hand if you have questions. Don't be shy. Okay, I see Juan Pablo, please.
Yes, I have one question around the joint liaison group from 2001. what are your perspectives on their performance on achieving these synergies for the 3 Rio Conventions? Like, do they have like some sort of like a report on results around their work on these work on looking for synergies?
Thank you, Juan Pablo, for this question. I will give just very short elements of answer, because I think our colleagues from the from the different Rio Convention secretariats here with us would be able to give you more detailed answer. But yes, the GLG sessions are always coming with minutes of the meetings, with action items always decided upon. You know, like, for example, again, this joint capacity building program was one of the action items. And then it was through the engagement of the 3 Rio Convention secretariats transformed it into reality. So you have multiple examples of those very practical actions. That's true that sometimes in the flow, let's say, of all the work of the 3 Rio Convention secretariats, it may not be that visible, but it's there. And we understand, because of the different decisions around the questions of synergies, that, of course, this work will continue intensifying in the future. But maybe if Stefania, Alejandro, or I see Claudia also online would like to give
Yes.
any yeah, Alejandro, I see
Alejandro,
your hand
please.
raised.
Thank you, Juan Pablo, for that question. Yeah, just to add to what.
We can't hear you properly, Alejandro.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Thank you. No, thank you, Juan Pablo, for your question. And yeah, adding to what Ludwig said, and also please, colleagues from CBD, please come in. The Joint Liaison Group is focusing a lot on monitoring at the level of the secretariats several aspects. There's not a quantified method of how synergy is being implemented, but it's more about ensuring a common narrative and messaging across the formal discussions on the importance of synergies. And as Ludwig mentioned, that has been translated into language in the different decisions from the different COPs on synergies. Also some mandates to the secretariats, and the development of common products like this joint capacity building program, and also communication products. For example, there are always these pavilions at the different COPs where there's a presentations or joint presentation statements from the 3 secretariats, and most of them, of course, relate about synergies. And like I've mentioned at the beginning of the event, this year is particularly important because of the 3 COPs taking place in the same year, and because we have new important elements in the context of the Rio Conventions, like the Global Biodiversity Framework, the revision of the next round of NDCs, land degradation targets. So the Joint Liaison Group is very, very active in providing this narrative, this political narrative, and trying to move forward the synergies process, in the understanding that at the end of the day, these are party-driven processes that, of course, the governments are the ones that are adopting and defining the future of the conventions. But yeah, just wanted to add that. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Alejandro. Any other questions? Okay, I see no further question, which means that Ludwig and Behan, you have done a very good job in your presentation. Okay, let me just see through the chat if we have any question. Okay. Okay, so since we have no further question, Behan, I leave you the floor for the next part of this session, which will be a quiz.
Thank you, Stefania. When we say it's a quiz, we mean a wrap-up fun quiz. No need to be pressured by this. We simply want to give you a quick quiz that you can see how much you understand synergies, how much you have understand what to get the idea of how the Rio Conventions are interlinked with each other. Let me share the screen again so that you can scan the QR code and also go to the wooclub.com, just like what we did before with the word cloud, and you'll be able to see the quiz that we prepared for you. So I'm starting the quiz, but I'm going to keep the slides on for a little bit while so that people can have time to scan it. You can see that we have 15 participants already. Okay, then I'm switching the screen now, but for those who would like to join in, you can still see the event code on the screen that I'll be sharing with you. So now it will allow me to switch the screen. And here we go. So now we have 18 participants. Let's go for the test, the quiz, the fun quiz, yes. The first question, the Rio Conventions are the only MEA's multilateral environmental agreements. Is this true or false? 4 results, 5 results already. Drum rolls. Okay, let me show the results. I see that many people are choosing no, but still some believe yes. Should I remind you that multilateral environmental agreements is a way bigger categories than the 3 Rio Conventions. The 3 Rio Conventions are only a small part of the MEAs. Beyond that, we also have, for example, the Ramsar Convention for the international wetlands, the newly established BBNJ Convention, which focuses on the biodiversity in areas beyond national jurisdiction. So MEAs are really a larger topic than the Rio Conventions. Let's move on to the second question. What is the name of the coordination body for the 3 Rio Conventions executive secretariats? Oh, good. I see we have 23 people participating already. Let's not keep everybody waiting too long and show the results directly. Now, the majority is choosing the Joint Liaison Group, while other people are still choosing the Rio Coordination Committee, Conventions Coordination Group. The correct answer will be the Joint Liaison Group, which Mr. Juan Pablo also raised question on it. So just to remind you again that this Rio Conventions Joint Capacity Building Program is also the output and a latest output of this Joint Liaison Group. And let's move on to the third question. Which ecosystem-based approach is recognized for its benefits across all 3 Rio Conventions? And let's have a look at the results. Exactly. Everybody knows that landscape restoration is providing the most co-benefits for all 3 Rio Conventions, while in contrast, monoculture plantations is known as a very, almost notorious actions that may create trade-offs, especially between climate change and biodiversity actions. Moving on, the national focal points of the Rio Conventions are always hosted under the same ministry. Is it true or false? And showdown, it's false. I remember, I believe you still remember the statistics Ludwig has presented to you that as of March in this year, that 153 countries have established their national focal points within the same or two same ministries. But beyond that, many countries are still separating the NFPs into three different ministries or departments. Fifth question, under which Rio Convention is the REDD plus mechanisms primarily developed? This one, we haven't really touched upon it in our presentation today, but I believe that many people has already heard about this name REDD plus. But I see that our participants are being a bit hesitant as the answers are not coming as fast as before. And let's not keep everybody waiting too long. The correct answer is A. The REDD plus mechanism stands for reduction of emissions from deforestation. It's quite a long name. I can't remember the full name, but you get the idea. So it's about reducing the emissions of greenhouse gas, which is hosted under the UNFCCC, and it supports the goal of both climate benefits and also biodiversity conservation, and also to reduce the desertification risks. Sixth question, among these acronyms, which one or ones do not refer to the Rio Convention's national planning processes? If you still remember, that Ludwig has presented one slide showing, well, how many was that? 4 national planning processes under the 3 Rio Conventions. So which of these do not belong to them? Let's see the results. I see that the majority has chosen EBA, which stands for ecosystem-based adaptation, and also the NBS stands for the nature-based solutions. However, the LDN targets are exactly under the Rio Convention's national planning processes, just like the NDCs, the NAP, and the NBSAP, while ecosystem-based adaptation and nature-based solutions are more of the measures that can be adopted within this national planning processes. Seventh question, UNFCCC COP takes place every 2 years, just like the CBD COPs and the UNCCD COPs. In fact, I believe the question may be better phrased if we reverse and asking you if the CBD COPs and the UNCCD COPs take place every year like UNFCCC. Let's see how everybody is answering. Well, the answer is false. UNFCCC COP takes place every year. If you still remember, last year is COP28 in Dubai, and this year would be COP29 in Baku in Azerbaijan. Now we're almost to the end of the quiz. Which ones of these global funds can support synergistic projects across Rio Conventions? We haven't really touched upon this question in today's discussion, but I'm going to give you a small tip. There can be more than one answers to that. And showcase. Well, I hope somebody is choosing all of them because all of them are the correct answers. In fact, Ludwig will touch upon these global funds in the next session of this webinar series. So stay tuned if you're interested in how to mobilize funds and resources for synergistic projects. The last but one question, which of the below is the science policy interface of the CBD? Again, a test for memorizing acronyms. I see again the participants are a bit hesitant at this time. The correct answer is the IPBES, which stands for Intergovernmental Platform for Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services, whereas the IPCC is the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. SPI is the Science Policy Interface under the UNCCD. As for CRIC, is the subsidiary body of the UNCCD. Now, everybody, thank you very much for your patience, and we are at the last question for this fun quiz. What is the subsidiary bodies exist only for UNFCCC and CBD? True or false? And the result is the correct answer would be false. Subsidiary bodies also exist for UNCCD. For example, in the previous question, we just mentioned CRIC. In fact, you can see that the three Rio Conventions share a strong linkages, not just because this scientific theories, but also in terms of their structures and the way they work. So I hope that after this webinar session today, you have a clear understanding on how on why synergies should be, but not just a possible option, but why it should be happening between the three Rio Conventions. Thank you again for your patience for participating in this fun quiz. I'm giving the floor back to Stefania. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Behan. So as we move closer to the end of our first session for today, and so I would like to thank Waltraud, Ludwig and Pehan for sharing your invaluable insights and experiences with us today. So today's discussion has underscored how you can leverage the Rio synergies and how to build synergies in planning processes. So before we conclude, I would like to invite all of you to turn on your camera for a group photo. So please don't hesitate, a group photo. Awesome. Okay. Okay. Okay, no problem, Teresa. Okay, shall we try it? Zinyu? Thank you. Okay, smile, everybody. Okay, good. Thank you very much, Zinyu. Thank you, everybody, for your participation. So once again, thank you, dear participants, for your presence and participation today. And we look forward to your participation for our next webinar, which will focus on assessing and mobilizing finance for synergistic projects. You will be provided more information on registration in the coming weeks, and we look forward to see as many as you to participate in our next session. So I would also like to thank representatives from the three secretariats, UNFCCC, CBD, and UNCCD for their support and collaboration. So thank you, everyone, once again. Nice evening, nice day, and we look forward to seeing you for our next session. Goodbye, everybody.
Thank you very much.
Bye.
Goodbye.
Bye.
Thank you,
Bye,
everyone.
everyone.
Have a nice day.
Bye
Goodbye.
bye.
Good job, everyone. Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you,
Have a
Claudia.
nice
See you
day.
soon.
Thank you.